Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The Supreme Court's decision to set up a constitution bench to examine the whole question of euthanasia has given fresh life to the debate about whether free individuals have a right to die. Tonight we examine the whole gamut of the moral and legal issues that lie behind the concepts of passive euthanasia as well as active euthanasia. That's the big debate in part 2. But first, a descent from what could be the sublime to what seems very much like the ridiculous. Do private members' clubs have a right to set a dress code and deny access to people whose attire flouts their rules? That's the key question provoked by the Tamil Nadu Cricket Club's refusal of entry to a sitting Madras High Court judge. Tonight we ask, is the wrath of Tamil politicians justified or unwarranted? And joining me now to discuss whether private clubs can enforce their individual dress codes and whether politicians can take action if they do is the well-known actress Khushbu Sundar, the managing partner of Councillage Suhail Seth, the highly refined and erudite business standard columnist Sunanda K. Dattare, and the former president of the Delhi Gymkhana Club, Air Marshal Ahluwalia. Khushbu Sundar, let me start with a question of principle. Given that clubs are private associations who have a right to set a dress code for themselves, on what grounds do you object to a club not permitting someone to enter because they are wearing a dhoti or chappals or a shirt without collars?
The clubs are definitely a private institution, but what I would like to say is dhoti is something which is part of your culture. They have your rules, but these rules were laid during the colonial period when all these clubs were built. And they were built during a time when the Britishers were very clear, saying that Indians should not enter the clubs. These clubs are exclusively for the whites, and that is the reason they had brought in this law. And why are we still continuing aping the West, and we are denying what is part of our culture, Indian culture, and say we will still stick to the rules which were brought in by the Britishers many years ago. And those rules were brought in to bring down the Indians. So why are we still sticking to that?
All right, I'm going to correct you on one simple point of fact. Many clubs like the Delhi Gymkhana, created in 1913, actually had Indians as full-fledged members well before independence. So it's not true that they were created exclusively for white British people. But let me bring you in on this point, Sunanda K. Dattare. Is this sartorial despotism and a hangover from the colonial days of the Raj, as both Jayalalitha in the Assembly and Khushbu a moment ago said? Or is it simply the contemporary collective wish of members of a particular club who have laid down rules for their fellow members about what they can and cannot wear? Which do you see it as?
Well, may I start with adding to your correction? The Calcutta Club was started as a 50-50 Indian and British association for a place where gentlemen of both races could meet on equal terms. The president was British one year, European one year, Indian the next year. The committee was 50% Indian and 50% British. So there was no question of a colonial hangover. People really have the most absurd ideas. They themselves suffer from a colonial hangover, and so they detect the long dead hand of colonialism in every kind of propriety. I wouldn't say sartorial discipline, I'd say sartorial propriety. And a club is a private association which abides by Indian ethics. The Indian clubs are very different from the clubs in London. If anyone here knows the clubs in London, the Athenaeum, the Travellers, the Carlton are nothing like the Gymkhana. These are Indian institutions now, and they abide by an entirely Indian hierarchy, Indian status symbols. So there's nothing colonial about them. Wear the dhoti by all means, but let it be a full ensemble. As in Bengal, dhoti, kurta, the chadar, angavastram. And that is a complete formal dress. The objection is to slapdash, casual, chalta hai kind of appearance in clubs which make them look slovenly. That's all.
All right. Let me put something else to you, Sunanda Dattare, before I come to Air Marshal Ahluwalia. If I understand correctly, clubs have a variety of restrictions. For instance, the South India Club in Calcutta only serves vegetarian food. I'm told the Calcutta Club will not permit women on the first floor, although God alone knows why. The Bombay Gymkhana insists that you wear closed footwear. And Jain housing societies don't permit non-vegetarians to either rent or buy on their premises. So if the Tamil Nadu Cricket Club actually insists that dhotis cannot be worn, why are they out of line in doing so? It may be considered bizarre, eccentric, peculiar. Some may even think about it as undesirable, but they have a right to do so, and it's just one of many restrictions that clubs impose on their members.
And I'd add to that list of restrictions, the India International Centre in Delhi wouldn't allow me, after my walk in Lodi Gardens, to have breakfast in shorts. They said, no, shorts are not allowed in the club. So I didn't object to that. I went back to my room and changed into a pair of trousers. These are house rules, and why not? And they're not rigid, they're always flexible. You mentioned the first floor of the Calcutta Club. My great uncle died in room number 1, and my mother and grandmother were both allowed in and stayed there for a long time with him. So these are all subject to the demands, needs of the moment.
Okay.
And even if they are restrictive, they reflect the wishes and desires of the members. They haven't been imposed on a club by anyone outside. It's the members who form these rules, not a colonial body sitting in London. For heaven's sake, let's recognize the democratic right of Indians to form an association and create its own rules and live by those rules.
That's a very important point, and I'll underline that for the sake of the audience. But Air Marshal Ahluwalia, let me put the exact opposite to you. You're a former president of the Gymkhana Club, one of the grandest in this country. Regardless of the freedom of members to set dress codes, is it right that they should debar what amounts to the national dress? Because in a sense, that is the point that Khushbu was making. Once upon a time, for example, the Gymkhana Club wouldn't permit you to wear kurta pajamas. That's now changed. Should a club in Chennai in 2014 prohibit the dhoti when that's the attire worn by probably most men in the state?
I think you need to look at it from two different aspects. One is the legal aspect, where a club, a private club, has the authority to decide on what the dress code should be, to decide on what discipline they want to have through a governing committee elected by the members and representatives of that club.
Marshal Ahluwalia, I'm not disputing that legal authority. Right. I'm questioning whether in exercising that legal authority and creating a dress code, you should effectively debar what is the national dress.
Absolutely. In fact, the second part of it is the responsibility to ensure that we should be having a dress code which reflects the culture and ethos and the kind of variety that we have in this country, and respect each state, each part of the country, and the sensibilities.
I'm going to stop you there, because you're sounding as if you're speaking in code. What you're saying to me in simple layman's language is that have a dress code, but don't debar the national dress as a result.
Absolutely, because
that's clear. Right. You would not, and therefore in the days when the Gymkhana did not permit kurta pajamas, it was wrong to do so.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Khushbu Sundar, let's widen this discussion a little. Is this matter of a dress code, whether you think it's appropriate or inappropriate, something on which Jaya Lalita, the Chief Minister, should threaten to cancel the licenses of clubs if they don't change their dress code? After all, first of all, what right does she have to do that? And secondly, a club is a private organization, and a dress code is neither against the law nor against the constitution. So it's pretty high-handed, isn't it, of the Chief Minister to threaten to cancel their licenses when she simply doesn't have the power to do so?
Karan, I think the institutions, definitely these clubs, they being private clubs, they have the right to have a dress code, but they definitely need to just loosen those rules, those rigid rules a bit. I mean, when you look at a dhoti or a veshti, as we call it down south, I think it's very important to understand that that's part of culture, and that's considered as one of the most dignified clothes a man can wear in South India. And it's not Tamil Nadu alone, in South India. As for Madam Jayalalitha, our respected Prime Minister, Chief Minister, saying that she will ban, just see to it that all the licenses are cancelled. I think she was trying to protect the Tamil culture. You will need somebody from the party to speak on her behalf. But yes, as a person, as a citizen of Tamil Nadu, I definitely do take a pride in saying that dhoti or veshti and angasturam is part of a culture, and I think that should be allowed in the clubs. And when you talk about these clubs, you have all elite and all people from high strata coming to these clubs. And when that is so, you definitely do know what kind of members you have in the club before giving it, because it's not that the people just give you the membership of the club as and wish whoever walks in.
All right.
They have a way. They are people who are, you have to go, the members, whoever wants to get a membership, they have to go there, they have to sit for a meeting, they have to decide as to what they're going to do, and there is a committee which decides whether
You're forgetting something, Khushbu. You're
not.
forgetting something, that people who apply to join these clubs are aware of the sartorial restrictions, and secondly, as part of the membership, they then impose those willingly and voluntarily upon themselves. So it's not an imposition. And if you don't like the sartorial restriction, don't join the club.
Yes, but I also would like to bring it to your notice that there are clubs who do allow veshti and dhoti, and I'm sure nobody would have thought that in 2014 a veshti or a dhoti is something which people would find that it's inappropriate to be worn in a club.
Because the membership chooses to decide willingly and voluntarily that they don't want people wearing veshti and dhotis. But let me bring in Sohail Seth, who's been able to join us. We've got terrible weather in Delhi at the moment, and getting lines through to Delhi is difficult tonight. Sohail Seth, I'm going to quote from an article that Shashi Tharoor wrote yesterday on this very subject. He says, in a democracy, we all enjoy freedom of association, and that includes the freedom to associate obnoxiously only with people who dress like us. And I want to put this to you. Is that not a freedom that liberals like you should defend just as strongly as you defend the freedom of expression or the right to property?
Not at all. I wouldn't want to be a member of a club where people walked in various, to quote Khushbu, in various culturally synchronized attire. I think it's ridiculous. And it's a facetious argument for Jayalalitha to, be the patron saint of sartorial elegance, because someone could say that wearing a cape on top of a sari is causing disrepute to the sari. So I think a club has every right to create the rules it does. If people don't want those rules to be followed or don't want to obey them, they have every right not to become members. As simple. I come from Calcutta. We were the cause of Vivian Richards actually, spending the New Year's Eve night away from the club because he wasn't sartorially conforming to the dress code. And you need a dress code. It's a private club. It's
Absolutely.
not Parliament, for instance.
Can I interrupt?
So I think
to
suggest that Tamil culture will be under threat because of a veshti is ridiculous.
You may have slightly misunderstood the Shashi Tharoor quotation. What he was saying is that we have in a democracy the freedom of association, and even if you're exercising that freedom obnoxiously, you have a right to exercise it obnoxiously. And it's in that context I'm saying, would you defend the right to exercise it?
Absolutely. I would not want to be a member of a club where someone dresses up in a manner that they deem fit, which is not in conformity with club rules.
Okay.
A. B. Karan, there is no defined national dress in India. In Calcutta, for instance, the dhoti worn with a kurta and covered sandals is what they define as the dress code, which is national in nature. In Delhi, it may be the kurta chudidar.
And
now
it
with
would not
Narendra
be
Modi, it might become the bangala.
And it would
so we
not
don't
be
know where the
accepted as
national dress
national,
lies.
and it would not be accepted as national by Punjabis or Kashmiris by any stretch of imagination. Let me bring you in, Sunanda.
Absolutely.
Hearing Sohail Seth speak reminded me of what Groucho Marx once said. I don't want to belong to any club that will accept me as a member. Shouldn't the attitude of dhoti-walas, if I may be allowed to use that word, be I refuse to enter any club that doesn't approve of the way I dress, rather than to seek to change the dress code and force your entry?
Well, there is this curious dichotomy in the Indian psyche. We run down what we aspire most to, and that's part of Indian life. I mean, everyone runs down colonialism and everyone wants to be as British as possible. They send their children to English-speaking schools while saying we must study only the national language. This is Indian hypocrisy run riot. Those people who want to join these clubs are, those people who admit that they want to join the clubs are in a minority. I'll give you an instance from real life. Satyajit Ray, the great film director, He joined the Calcutta Club and he went around afterwards saying, why did they bring me into this club? I have nothing to do with this, with social life at that level. Well, for heaven's sake, he signed the application form. He presented himself before the committee. He went through all the forms.
Absolutely.
And then it was fashionable and nationalistic to run down the institution and his membership. So all the dhotiwalas will queue up to join in, they'll stampede to join in and uphold their right to wear the dhoti in flagrant defiance of the club rules.
Let me, on the other hand, put this to you, Air Marshal Ahluwalia. Is a certain measure of discretion, and should I also say delicacy, needed when dress codes are enforced? For example, I once walked into the Oxford and Cambridge in London wearing jeans and a jacket without realizing that that breached the dress code. Rather than throw me out, the hall porter stepped up and very quietly said that the club secretary would like a word with me. When I met him, he quietly informed me that I had breached the dress code, and I quietly left. Do you think the Tamil Nadu Cricket Association is guilty of what I might call indelicacy or even thoughtlessness in the way they enforce the dress code on a sitting judge of the Madras High Court? Was it the way it was done rather than the fact that they have a dress code?
Undoubtedly. In fact, whoever invited the honorable judge and the two lawyers, senior lawyers that were with him, he should have taken charge of the situation. He should have briefed them what is expected of them in terms of their dress, and he should have ensured that they were not put through the harassment, if I might call it, or the indignity of being told that they're not properly dressed.
Okay. Khushbu Sundar, you brought up this point that somehow this was a slap in the face of Tamil culture, and that the Chief Minister and you yourself were fighting for Tamil culture, which you are very proud, and you have every right to be proud of Tamil culture. But what I put to you is this. This is a rule set by Tamil people themselves for a club created for Tamil people in Tamil Nadu. How then is it something that is against Tamil culture? Unless, of course, you believe the Tamil people themselves are conspiring against Tamil culture.
Absolutely, I would like to correct it here. It's the argument is still the same, because initially when we started this argument, and I said that people still like to believe they lived during those colonial periods, and they would like to continue with these same rules which were set way back during the Britishers. And the committee members, they need to ease out, because they are the same people, the committee members, the people who are on the board of these clubs, they are the same people who take pride in wearing these veshtis or dhotis and walking around everywhere. Okay. But it's only when it comes to the club, they want everybody to be dressed with a suit and a collar and a proper pant, with a collared shirt. I mean, it's a recreation club. People go there to relax. It's not a roundtable conference. It's not a business deal where you're
sitting. But the members are willingly and voluntarily accepting the dress code. You're making it seem if it's imposed on them. It's not. They've applied to join a club with this dress code. They may well have been attracted by the fact it has this dress code. So what's the basis of your complaint?
You have a dress code. Even in recreation clubs, you have swimming pool, you wear a swimsuit at the pool, you have a squash club where you wear track pants or shorts when you're playing a squash, or when you're playing a badminton, you have dress codes at different levels. But when it comes to a club where you're entering to have dinner or to have a drink or two, I don't think you have to be dressed in a suit or a pant and shirt with a tie or a collared shirt. I think you have to be decently dressed.
You've made that point.
If a woman can wear a sari and walk in, I definitely wouldn't appreciate the comment made that if you wear a cape over a sari, and if that's a breach of a dress code. I think it's something very personal. A dress code is something very personal.
I accept the point you're making.
Should be allowed.
I accept the point you're making with tremendous eloquence. I'll simply add, I wonder how clubs would react if a man decided to walk in wearing a sari. That would be really a test, not just of propriety, but dress codes as well. But Sohail said, coming back very briefly to the seriousness of this issue, I want to draw your attention to another distinction that Shashi Tharoor made in that article yesterday. He said, if clubs rent out their premises for public functions, which include attendance by members of the general public, then for that function, they cannot impose their dress code on the people who attend. As he put it, if they want to host book releases, they should have no choice but to accept that books are read by people of all sizes, ages, and attires. Would you say that if a club makes money by renting its premises, then for the duration of that function from which they're making money, you can't impose a dress code on the general public?
I don't agree with Shashi on that, Because I think a club is a private club. If they're renting out their banqueting facilities, I think club rules still need to be maintained. Because by that logic, if you're attending a book launch of Shashi's book in the Delhi Gymkhana, you're certainly not going to be allowed in your shorts just because it's Pax Indica. So I think the argument is a bit facetious. The logic, Karan, is very simple. Dress codes are meant to create two things: a sense of discipline and a sense of conformity. Whether it's the Indian dress, national dress, that's a separate argument. You have to follow a dress code, as simple. If you don't like the dress code, either have the force of power to change the dress code, given the debate that has erupted, or fall in line. To now make this into a national issue and Tamil culture issue, I think is a bit silly. Because Tamil culture is far more vibrant, is far more deep to be, rocked by someone not being allowed in a veshti.
Let me end this discussion, Chief Marshal Saab, with one very simple point. Temples are public places where anyone can go. But there are some temples in India which refuse entry to women if they come wearing pants. No politician has ever threatened legislation against that. Are politicians picking on clubs because clubs are middle-class institutions and therefore more vulnerable?
Yeah. Actually, I'd just like to make
I'll answer that quickly because we're really out of time.
Yeah.
This specific question. Are they picking on clubs because clubs are vulnerable because they're middle-class institutions?
Clubs are vulnerable. Any gated community like you have in these clubs obviously becomes suspect. Suspect because they are carrying on the tradition that existed many decades ago, and they should have changed over a period of time and accepted reality. For instance, who is to decide what is the dress code, what is right and what is wrong?
The membership of the club.
Being suited and booted.
But the membership decides it.
The membership decides it, but what has happened is that much of the perception is still a hangover to ape certain communities in the West.
We have a very interesting situation. We have a former president of the Gymkhana Club actually not siding with the rules that the club has set for itself. You believe these are aping the West, as Khushbu was saying?
Yes, and we've changed it. We've changed it. Today you can go to the Delhi Gymkhana Club.
And you're saying other clubs haven't changed it?
Haven't.
So those clubs are behind the time?
Yes, certainly. We have to change
my last question. So you don't agree with the premise of my question that politicians are picking on clubs because as middle-class institutions they are vulnerable. You don't agree with that?
No, I think it's a question of would you prevent the Prime Minister from entering a club which doesn't permit the kind of dress that he wears?
I hope so.
Would you do that?
Let me tell you, I hope so. If a club is honest to its dress code and it's not hypocritical and it's not sucking up to the Prime Minister, then by rules and by fairness and by balance, the Prime Minister, whoever it is, Indira Gandhi or Narendra Modi, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, if that person is breaching the dress code of the club, he should be kept out, just as you and I would be. To create a distinction because he's Prime Minister would be wrong.
That's one aspect. The other aspect is you're telling the Prime Minister that he doesn't know what perhaps needs to be in conformity with a perceived.
All right. Very interesting. Uniform. I'll simply underline it. A president of the Gymkhana Club actually taking a line that maybe some of the membership of your own club might not agree with. But we have, unfortunately, run right out of time. My thanks to all four of my guests for joining me. This is clearly not just a fascinating discussion, but it's also one on which people have a lot of hot points and personal points to make.